Force and Power book. For the truth is that nobody is deserving enough to defeat Tommy Egan. Tommy Egan is the one guy in the Power universe that you would believe would be immortal. Ghost did bite the bullet, but his story always brought him to a point where he was unable to leave the life he had chosen. He and Ghost were the originals. Would you say, however, who can guarantee that will be the case? As Power Book 4, Force Season 3 enters its final stretch, it has been on fire. Although it is obviously headed toward a conclusion, Tommy's demise doesn't seem to be that conclusion. There are rumors regarding a Tommy and Tariq spinoff, which should indicate that Tommy won't be leaving the final season in a body bag. However, you can never say never when it comes to Power. Why the same thing about Tommy? Perhaps. However, Power Book 4, Force has argued that Tommy is the one person in this reality who ought to be considered untouchable. It's safe to be a little nervous about what the last hour might bring, though, as nothing has been confirmed. Power is constantly on the verge of war, and although while there isn't a full-scale Chicago conflict following the events in Power Book 4, Force Season 3 Episode 9, many people are still thinking about getting retribution. Even though Tommy killed Diamond inadvertently, it will just increase Jenard's animosity, and there's no way the hour will end without them squaring off one last time. However, it's reasonable to infer that only one man survives that altercation. Who, then? Given how frequently we've witnessed Tommy elude death in the past, the thought of him passing away seems unreal. It's difficult to envision anyone in Chicago outwitting him, so if it were to happen here, it would have to be mostly due to luck. He simply doesn't make mistakes that would result in his death. I'll go one step farther and say that nobody in Chicago should be able to defeat Tommy Egan. Although Power Force has produced some excellent and memorable characters, none of them have attained the status of Ghost, Cannon, or even Tariq in terms of being deserving of competing against Tommy and emerging victorious. Jenard is currently at the top of Tommy's list of foes in Chicago, but after everything Tommy has been through, how terrible would it be for him to lose to Jenard Sampson? Jenard can perform at his best when he wants to. However, he is self-centered and frequently allows his emotions to influence business choices. Does anyone think that the current Jenard will be able to control all of Chicago, even with CBI firmly under his control? Vic is still out there in the wind, and even though he ran away from Chicago with his tail between his legs, Jenard isn't the only one with a grudge against Tommy. If the final surviving Flynn returned to confront Tommy once more, I wouldn't be shocked. Vic would be even more undeserving if Jenard didn't deserve to kill Tommy. Vic is the complete opposite of what Tommy stands for because he is a follower and a snitch. I would give Vic the biggest eye roll if he boasted that he killed Tommy Egan, even though Tommy may have played around with Vic for a bit too long. Throughout the series, he hasn't done anything to demonstrate that he is deserving of a big matchup with Tommy. Tommy Egan's death at the end of Power Book 4, Force is problematic since no one deserves it. Not Bobby, Jenard, Vic, or any other cartel member with a grudge. Tommy is one of the first members of the Power universe, thus he's not just any player. Even while he has faced some formidable opponents in Chicago, they have all seemed like challenges he would eventually overcome rather than true rivals. Tommy's death would have to be a moment that felt justified and unavoidable if the show decided that it was necessary. But has that been the result of Force? Conversely, I think they've been continuously presenting us with a Tommy who can outwit everyone and any pandemonium without succumbing to it. Since Tommy has never been stronger, I would contend that killing him would feel more like a result of the story's conclusion than of where it should go. Certain individuals are simply unbeatable in a universe based on treachery, violence, ambition, and yes, power. Rather, they are supposed to outlive and outsmart everyone who believed they had the right to put an end to them. And now? Well, nobody in Chicago is worthy of wearing the badge that claims to have killed Tommy Egan. How do you envision the Power Force universe concluding with just 1 hour remaining? Tell me in the comments section below. However, there was so much packed into this hour that it's difficult to know where to start before we reach the conclusion. Even though I thought this finale was great, I will confess that some storylines were resolved so fast that it was nearly humorous, but there was a lot to do in a short period of time. Although they did their best, this series would have benefited from 1 or 2 extra hours so that some plots wouldn't have to stop so suddenly. There was no time for Bobby to engage in some serious back and forth with Jenard and Tommy, or for him to play a little game of cat and mouse with Sang after he gained leverage. Every minute mattered because time was of the essence. It was obvious from the start that CBI would face Tommy's motley bunch, and it was exciting to watch the two teams try to outdo one another by going all out. Jenard shot Raheem in the head as if it were nothing since he didn't have time to try to expose his deceit. Of course, he was correct about him, but that was a blatant sign that no games were being played here. If this had happened earlier, Jenard might have attempted to give Raheem false information to bring back to Tommy, but he couldn't afford to play chess at that precise moment because they might be engaged in combat at any moment. Although it was unlikely that Tommy would send Shanti to Jenard, their exchange was entertaining since neither of them was a skilled actress and it seemed like they were trying to see how far they could push it until the other snapped. Power Book 4, Force Season 3 Episode 7's irresponsible conversation in the restroom and Jenard's infidelity on Shanti put a stop to their potential. Jenard was astute enough to recognize that, regardless of their personal history, Shanti prioritizes business, and the whole incident demonstrated to her that Jenard's ego would never allow for a genuine partnership between them. More than anything, circumstances led her to collaborate with Tommy. But during the past few episodes, it would have been good to learn more about Shanti's true feelings on having to work with the man she has essentially wanted dead since we first met. In the cosmos, it frequently occurs that former adversaries are compelled to turn into allies, usually because they have larger, more immediate enemies in common. However, without another season, we were deprived of witnessing what that partnership would have looked like when Shanti and Tommy weren't just partnered together out of necessity. In fact, they made a lot of sense as partners. At the beginning of the season, I never would have predicted Tommy, Shanti, Miguel, and D-Mac to be a strong team, but as the season went on, it felt perfect. However, facing CBI was never going to be simple, especially with their unit fairly well equipped. You could tell the hour was developing into something more than a conflict between two opposing factions based on how it played out. When Tommy eventually arrived in Chicago, he would either receive everything he desired or nothing at all. Since the cartels were a constant threat that loomed over almost every action Tommy took, the cartels banding together was one of those things that felt put in there to try to explain Ortega's removal and essentially finish the plotline. Since the plot was by no means the most engaging and, to be honest, we didn't need to spend any more time with it, I'll overlook how quickly it ended. Tommy flipping Grayskull was a necessary method to put a stop to the RD and D-Mac dispute, but I wasn't happy about it either, if only because we could have spent more time somewhere else. Jenard was greatly despised by Grayskull. Tommy was prepared to not only drive the bus over Jenard but also back it up a few times just to be safe. He hardly needed to say anything. Although I like to assume that Tommy, Shanti, and Miguel would have finally located Jenard, the same thing would have happened. Tommy and company would have left CBI in ruins, and a blast from the past would have delivered what may have been the largest mic drop the show has ever seen. The intense adrenaline rush of the camera shifting to Tariq after he saved Tommy's life persisted even though everyone knew he was returning. The dramatics and theatrics of Tariq's arrival were so amazing that I'm ready to overlook the fact that he has never shot that well in his life. Even though none of the main participants were killed, the entire shootout was really skillfully done. I didn't anticipate it, but it's usually a little corny when everyone dies except for the main characters. It completely reduces the stakes, and since I'm so accustomed to power not always taking that path, I was shocked that Jenard wasn't slain in that fight because everything was predicated on it being the conclusion. I apologize, Tommy should have killed Jenard. You may argue that D-Mac should have killed Tommy, but in the end, Tommy had to do it because of the intense and long-standing animosity between Tommy and Jenard. Even though I enjoyed watching everyone turn against Jenard permanently, I was really irritated by the decision not to murder him. It's time for people to realize that if Jenard is leading, his team will never win. Tommy wasn't supposed to be the leader, therefore it doesn't even matter if he is on the opposing side of the conflict, anyone might really oppose Jenard and they would still prevail. That was always Diamond's responsibility, and Jenard tricked himself into believing he could be him while he was away. Boo, it was never going to be you. I would still have been annoyed, but I would have accepted it if Jenard had concluded the series by himself, bemoaning his shortcomings. Rather, The power gods made the decision that I could not leave this series without letting out my greatest sigh. I could tell every time they cut to Vic and Ray in their rabbit paradise that Vic would eventually return to Chicago because he is unable to control himself. He's been humiliated in every way imaginable, including another abortive attempt on Tommy's life, yet he can't get enough of Tommy Egan. To find out who has been most enamored with Tommy Egan throughout the series, we ought to conduct a poll. Would you vote for Vic? Jenard? The Serbs? Before Mireya knocked him down, Miguel. One of the key reasons Vic has never been able to let go of his dispute with Tommy is that he has never been able to move past what happened with Gloria. Let's be honest about everything. His blood thumped Tommy Egan has to go every day, and it drove him back to Chicago, even though he could have lived out his days in peace with Ray and continued to snitch. My personal dread is Jenard and Vic working together in any way, and since the program is over, we don't really need to witness it. But will that really be the case? Based on Tariq and Tommy's last chat, and what a conversation it was, Power Legacy appears to be a go even in the absence of a formal announcement. Allow me to express my admiration once more for the way Power Book 2, Ghost transformed Tariq from one of the most despised characters on TV into a complex yet endearing antihero. The fact that I like Tariq still surprises me occasionally, and I'm not being sarcastic. There is a lot of tension and a difficult past in Tommy and Tariq's relationship. Even though they have finally reached a point where there is a truce and they can cooperate when the necessity and opportunity arise, Tommy will never forget that Tariq killed Ghost. As they had that chat on the rooftop, which was perfectly appropriate for the two men, you could see that there was still love and respect between them. One thing about Tariq is that he is constantly planning ahead. You could see the wheels moving in Tariq's head as soon as D-Mac informed him that Tommy was expecting a child. But which way is it turning? I briefly thought whether Tariq was going to kill Tommy and we were all being tricked, but it didn't make sense. To be honest, Tommy's quick abandonment of all he worked so hard to make a reality in Chicago likewise defies logic, that is, unless you begin to consider the deeper significance of it all. Tommy has desired to be king from the start, all the way back to New York. He desired to rule with Ghost, but as we all know, that was never going to happen for a variety of reasons. Chicago served as both a fresh start and a means of achieving the elusive authority he has long sought. However, once you get it, the only thing left to fight for is to keep it. And where's the joy, excitement, and fun in that? Tommy says that going back to his house with his new family and collaborating with a more evolved Ghost that even he had to admire is about as on-brand as it gets. Tommy gained power, but it turns out that total power is still insufficient. I literally had chills at the end of the hour. From the music drop to Tommy towering above the city he had conquered with Tariq. It's difficult for those of us who have been enjoying this cosmos since 2014 to put into words all the feelings and meanings these shows evoke. It was the ideal conclusion and a prelude to what might happen next. Let me just mention Sang and Mireya in passing because they were the two other major storylines that required wrapping, and they did. Were we meant to be aware that Tommy and Sang were collaborating? If that's the case, I missed a part of the tale, but the largest real shock of the day was Sang killing Bobby. Overall, Sang doesn't matter, but I enjoy it when a story defies expectations, even if it's in a way that I find objectionable. Unfortunately, there is little you can do to stop Stacy and Bobby from becoming the faces of corruption in Chicago. Regarding Mireya, I've always been honest about not really falling for the Tommy and Mireya one true love propaganda because I've seen Tommy in other relationships, and everything about this relationship happened so fast that it never developed into something I felt was worth supporting.